Parliament's Standing Committee on Public Accounts has raised concerns about the threat of corruption in the procurement and distribution of COVID-19 vaccines in South Africa. SCOPA has also warned that the vaccines must be administered and protected with absolute high moral standards of governance. The committee wants clear adjudication of the processes set to decide how the vaccines are handled. Joining us now is SCOPA chairperson Mkhuleko Hlengwa. Good evening, Mr. Hlengwa, and thank you so much for your time. You know, it's an interesting call that you have made because when you call for open tender systems, you're effectively asking for more transparency. And we haven't seen a lot of transparency during this period, especially around the procurement of vaccines, just bringing them into South Africa. And that in itself has been problematic. Mr. Hlengwa, I think you're on mute. If you can just double check that button for me, please.
My apologies, Kathy. Yes, my apologies about that. Yes, look, we understand that government is overwhelmed and they are dealing with a lot, and of course they are, competing international expectations really around the world. But what is of critical importance is that when these vaccines arrive here at home, we should not have a repeat of what happened with the PPEs. And so we are really calling for this open tender process because we want to ensure that we enforce preventative measures. We do not want a situation where we have to come and clean up a mess. It's a very delicate situation where we are in, and South Africans are in desperate need for a vaccination process which is going to be anchored in integrity and that they can trust it. And that trust begins with lending the tenders to people who are credible and to ensure that there's no corruption. So this is a call really which we should not be making in the normal course of life. It shouldn't be that we have to be saying be transparent, don't be corrupt. But because hindsight is the best side, and we recognize that we are dealing with people who have got no shame or qualms about actually being corrupt, even in the midst of an international pandemic and a tragedy of epic proportions in the country, the risks are too huge to take. And so we are really, as a committee, trying to be proactive and to institute preventative measures because consistent with the health realities we are dealing with, prevention is better than cure.
Do you think that there's an appetite for the request that you're making? Because as you rightfully point out, in a perfect world, you shouldn't have to be asking about these processes to be made public. They should have been made public from the get-go.
Indeed, that is absolutely right. It's not a matter really of an appetite. This is something which we will have to do for the purposes of a process which is going to fulfill the desired outcome. The president last night spoke about population immunity. And if we are to arrive at the population immunity within the stipulated timeframes, we're going to have to adhere to due processes. So our call really is to enhance the process, but also at the same time to push back on the frontiers of corruption. And also you will recognize that one of the features of the PPE corruption was companies being registered today and receiving tenders tomorrow. And so we have to actually look at that as well. And so the public adjudication and public evaluation of these tenders will actually ensure that credible people come forward and credible and reputable companies, and that there's nothing that is done through the back door. We are aware that there's been an application to National Treasury for a deviation. And of course, that is prescribed for in law, but it is also must be subjected to due processes. So it's not a deviation in a vacuum. It does not presuppose that due process will not be followed. So whatever avenue is taken by the Department of Health and National Treasury and government in general will have to be a process of public scrutiny and one which is transparent. It is to the interest of government, really, if it does not want this process to be compromised or cast on doubt, that they actually do this. So it's in the national interest.
As it stands, are you satisfied with the level of accountability that there has been, even before yourselves as SCOPA, around the government's response to COVID-19, and I would premise it rather just in terms of the response that we've had over the last couple of months and the monies that have been spent through that period in the midst of all of these deviations that have been given the green light.
No, we're not satisfied, and we are quite overwhelmed, of course, by the work that we have to do. As things stand now, we're going to be having to process the SIU investigation reports, the Auditor General's special audits report, looking at the billions of corruption which have taken place, the irregular appointments of tenders, and the fraud that has actually taken place. The measures, of course, which Cabinet has brought forth, the Interministerial Committee chaired by Minister Lamula, amongst others, which was to help, we'll still have to come back and make a presentation to us, and so far as the collation of information is concerned. But where we are at now is to say, once the report by the SIU has come out, there will have to be prosecutions. And of course, we are pushing for the recoveries of monies as well. And the SIU has been an incredible partner, and they've been highly cooperative and fully understand where we are, and they have got a keen appreciation of the kind of directives that we are issuing. And so we are satisfied on that front that the law enforcement agencies, by and large, have turned the corner for the better, and so far as cooperating with Parliament is concerned. And so that is a positive, generally, which we have to ride that wave, but also then entrench it as a norm, because we do come from a past where there has been a lack of cooperation. And so that's the positive that comes out of this. But I think government will still have to do more. And there has to be introspection on the part of government, that have they themselves done enough? Have they covered themselves in any glory? And for the president to actually effect the necessary consequence management, even at a cabinet level, to make sure that we do not have a repeat of the kind of corruption that we have seen.
Of course, that's where the biggest difficulty lies, isn't it, Mr. Hlengwa? That, you know, in as much as the call that you're making as SCOPA is a noble one, as long as they know proper controls that are being put in place at those departmental levels, nothing is going to change, and we'll always be working retrospectively and having to find people who've committed corruption rather than making it as hard as possible for that corruption to take place.
Well, we have to maintain an optimistic outlook, because we are in an era of corrective interventions given the history of this country, and the wholesale turnaround strategies which are being effected by the respective government departments and entities will take time, unfortunately, because the tentacles of corruption have spread quite far. They have been entrenched for the longest of time, and so we have to uproot them. But at the same time, there is absolutely nothing in law which prevents National Treasury and the Department of Health to act consistently with the call that we are making. So this becomes a question of political will, insofar as Minister and Minister Mboweni will be concerned. Also CC'd in the correspondence that we have said, to say, explore the legal and rightful avenues for the open tender process we are calling for, because it's prescribed for. So this is a matter now which really will speak to political will, but also at the same time, we are going to have to periodically, at all material points of the process, expect and demand reports and briefings on these things, and actually force upon government the realities of transparency. So that option remains readily available to us as well, but it shouldn't have to come to that. I think that there is a keen appreciation on the part of the ministers who are concerned that this process will have to be anchored in integrity if it is to pass public confidence.
Sure. Let's leave it there for tonight, and please do keep us posted and let us know if you get a response from the officers of both ministers. Mkhuleko Hlengwa is the SCOPA chair.